So today's topic is the abomination of desolation, part 1. And we leave now the more general topics and we will come now to the more specific topics, and this is where we will deal with apocalyptic prophecy. That means we will go to Daniel and to the book of Revelation, and we will talk about some topics there. But we will start with Jesus' end-time speech. And this is because Jesus' end-time speech is, so to say, giving us the frame. It's giving a general overview of what is going to happen at the end of time. And all these events from Revelation, for example, you can then put them in this frame that you have elaborated from Jesus' end-time speech. And this is what we will do today. Now, as with so many other texts and passages, this won't be a complete analysis of an interpretation. So we will not have a look at how was the speech fulfilled in the times of the destruction of Jerusalem, for example. We will have a look at the logic. We will work out the structure, this frame, and yeah, we will have some thoughts. And yeah, so without losing any more words, let us just get into it. Matthew 24, verse 4. And Jesus answered and said to them, to his disciples, "Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows." Now, it's absolutely fascinating that right at the beginning, before Jesus starts to get, the disciples asked him, when will this happen? So they ask for a sign, basically. But before Jesus is really giving a sign, he is giving a warning. And he's warning of deception. And this is fitting perfectly well to the last topic that we had, the law for the truth, where we saw that there was a falling away coming to pass, going to happen at the end of the world, at the end of time. And this has to do with deception. So, and Jesus is warning us of deception. So there's deception going on at the end of time. He says in verse 5, For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. Now, if we talk about the end of the world, Jesus says that there will be wars and rumors of wars. And in verse 7, for a nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Let us stop here. Now, Jesus says these things must come to pass. So it's not optional accessoire. It's not that this maybe will happen. He says this must happen. I will not come before this happened. And he's talking here about war. Now, verse 7, where he says, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Now, I've heard sermons on Jesus' end-time speech, and when the United States invaded Iraq, for example, people or preachers saying, oh, this is a fulfillment of Matthew 24. Jesus is talking about wars, and here we have war. When I prepared this series, and I had a closer look at Jesus' end-time speech, and I was reading this verse, I stopped and thought, Jesus is talking about more than just country A making war against country B, and there is a country C that is invading country D. Jesus says nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom, so that it reads like everyone against everyone. That's how it reads. So this sounds like a very widespread war that will take place. And so the question is, will we see a third world war? And I have a quote here from a theologian. This is Arnold G. Fruchtenbaum, Handbuch der biblischen Prophetie. It was in German, and I translated the text into English. I don't know if this book exists in English. Now, just some words to Fruchtenbaum. He was a Polish Jew, and he went to the United States, and there he became a Christian. Okay, and he had a heavy focus on Hebrew and the Old Testament. So that's his great focus. And he writes the following. Also an important key for understanding is the meaning of the sentence, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. When put into the time historical frame of Jewish history back then, this phrase points to a widespread conflict within the addressed area. It is used in two places in the Old Testament. And then he quotes Isaiah 19 and 2 Chronicles, and we will have a look at this text now. 2 Chronicles 15. But let us just stop here. So he says, Jesus uses this term, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And he says, if we want to understand what that means, we have to have a look at what this meant in the time of Jesus or in the culture back then. Okay, and that's what he's trying to show now here. 2 Chronicles. Now the Spirit of God came upon Azariah, the son of Oded. And he went out to meet Asa and said to him, hear me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. The Lord is with you while you are with him. Quite important principle. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. Now you could make a perfectly application to our personal lives here at this point. Now, I will not do this because we don't have the time. I fear this topic will become very long, but we will see. Verse 3, for a long time Israel has been without the true God, without a teaching priest, and without law. But when in their trouble they turned to the Lord God of Israel and sought him, he was found by them. And in those times there was no peace to the one who went out or to the one who came in. But great turmoil was on all the inhabitants of the lands. So nation was destroyed by nation and city by city, for God troubled them with every adversity. But you be strong, and do not let your hands be weak, for your work shall be rewarded. So he is describing here the situation around Israel, and he says there was nation destroyed by nation and city by city. So this whole area around Israel, where the focus is, was visited by wars. Isaiah 19, that's the other text that he was quoting. Behold, the Lord rides on a swift cloud and will come into Egypt. So this is a judgment against Egypt. The idols of Egypt will totter at his presence, and the heart of Egypt will melt in its midst. I will set Egyptians against Egyptians. Everyone will fight against his brother, and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. The spirit of Egypt will fail in its midst. I will destroy their counsel. So here you have this style. Okay, everyone against everyone, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. The spirit of Egypt will fail in its midst. I will destroy their counsel. Verse 22, and the Lord will strike Egypt. He will strike and heal it. They will return to the Lord, and he will be entreated by them and heal them. So what is this text talking about? Everyone against everyone, city against city in Egypt. This is talking about civil war, like it's civil war. Okay, that's going on there. So the focus is on Egypt, and there is civil war, total chaos. And now back to Fruchtenbaum's quote. However, in Jesus' speech on the Mount of Oil, the whole world is in view. Okay, now the focus is not on Egypt, and there was total war in Egypt. The focus is also not on the area around Israel, and there was total war around Israel. But he says now the focus is on the whole world. The whole world is in view, as can be seen in verses 14, 21, 30, and 31 of chapter 24. Thus here Jesus is talking about the world, a worldwide conflict that marks both the first birth pains and the beginning of the end time. In the times of Christ, the phrase nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom, this is now important. In the times of Christ, the phrase nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom was the Jewish term for a world war that would precede the coming of Messiah. Okay, and then he goes on at another passage. Jesus already mentioned limited wars between some few nations. These, however, would not mark the end. And the text he's referring to is Luke 29, verse 9. Let us just read it. But when you hear of wars and commotions, do not be terrified, for these things must come to pass first, but the end will not come immediately. Here now, he explicitly states, in this Matthew 24 passage that we just read, here now he explicitly states that nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom would induce the beginning of the end. In order to be able to understand the expression nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom, we have to go back to the original meaning of those terms within Judaism. We already talked about it earlier in this book. This phrase is a Hebrew expression for world war. So here Jesus points out that a world war, in contrast to one or multiple geographically limited wars, would mark the beginning of this world's end. So Furtenbaum is telling us that this expression is a term for a world war. And that is what I already told you and what I already thought about before I had access to this quote. I found it months later. So maybe Jesus is really talking about a world war here, and maybe we should get ready for a new world war. Okay? But when you hear of wars, now Jesus is talking about other things as well. Okay, he's not only talking about wars. If we look to Matthew 24, he's also talking about famines and pestilences and earthquakes in various places. And in relate to this, we can also have a look at Luke 21. This is also Jesus' end-time speech, just reported in Luke. But when you hear of wars and commotions, do not be terrified, for these things must come to pass first, but the end will not come immediately. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. So here you have this world war. And there will be great earthquakes in various places and famines and pestilences. And there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. Now, I know that, and we will come to this in a moment, people will say, okay, whenever there's a famine, okay, this is a sign for the end time. I'm not sure if this is really what Jesus is trying to tell us here. I think the point Jesus is making here is that, war, famine, and pestilence are like, three brothers that are coming together. Because war is wearing out the population, and so the population is hungering, and so their bodies and immune systems are very weak, and that makes it an easy game for any kinds of diseases. So even a small disease can become a pestilence and can become fatal. So this is like the three brothers, and you will find these brothers in history again and again. Where there was war, there so often was also famine and pestilence. If we, for example, go to the First World War, this is an article from a German newspaper, the worst plague that ever swept the earth. And it reads, the last real pandemic struck the world at the end of the First World War. In 1819, the Spanish flu claimed more than 2 million deaths in Europe alone. Worldwide, it is said, it were up to 50 million. And this text it also reads, on July 8, 1918, Walter Brasch, chief physician at a clinic in Schwabing, a district of Munich, reported on the outbreak. And this is now this physician reporting. In about 10 days, 77 people with the flu came under observation, and their mortality rate was alarmingly high. It was 24, and it is noteworthy that the sad fate met mostly younger, strong individuals. The doctor could not understand that. So 77 people came under observation because they were sick, and 24 of them died. So this is a lot more than we saw with Corona. Okay. After infection, the sick was thrown down for several days, sometimes up to a week. An unusually high number of them died. At the beginning of the pandemic, often every 10th patient. In some hospitals and military hospitals, even every third. So it was very, very fatal. How many victims the 1918-19 pandemic claimed can hardly be said seriously. For Germany, the minimum estimate is 300,000 deaths. It has 5 per 1,000 of the population. But it could also have been twice as many. The medics had other things to do than to determine whether the infection or general emaciation had led to organ failure in a dead person who had shown symptoms of flu. Of course, okay, there was total chaos in Germany. Germany was ruined, like whole Western Europe. And there were other things to do than to closely examine who died of Spanish flu or something else. But it was a very deadly flu, and it was the consequence because of a war. Okay, and it had an easy gain because the population was so worn out because of the war, because of hunger and these things. And this is exactly what Jesus is warning us. War, hunger, pestilence. There's another article. This is now after the Second World War, the White Death. Death during the starvation winter. Now the Second World War was over and everything laid in ruins. And all the houses were destroyed. There was hunger, diseases. And like it is so often, one disaster was chasing the other. And so it reads, at the end of 1946, a dry, hot summer caused the crop yields in many places to fall short of even the modest expectations. So people in Germany, they expected to have very little harvest. And then they had such a dry, hot summer where there was almost no rain, that little that was growing on the fields was then, fading because there was no water. And then an unexpected development made the situation even worse. And then following that very hot summer where there was only a very, very poor harvest, between November 1946 and March 1947, people had to go through the coldest winter of the 20th century. According to the historians' projections in Germany, there were several 100,000 deaths. So you had an incredibly hot summer that destroyed the harvest, and then you had an incredibly cold winter where those people, they could only eat very little, so the body was absolutely weakened. They then froze to death because it was so cold. Now, other estimates, there was a Canadian historian who estimated 5 million people in Germany that died because of hunger. In the Soviet Union, it were 2 million deaths. And this is the point, and this is also written in this article. The places it hit the most and the severest were the cities. Okay, the cities suffered the most. In cities, hunger became the central experience. Now, the interviewer asked this historian, what was the supply situation like? Then Schlemmer, the historian, answered, that depended on where you lived, whether in the country or in the city. Now, we are talking about country living, and we are asking ourselves the question, why should we build an ark? And we know that Jesus is predicting us that there will be war. Remember the words, these things must come to pass. It's not optional. It's not a maybe or a probably. It's a they must come to pass. And according to Fruchtbaum, he clearly said this expression means a world war. Okay? So maybe we can learn something about history. We would be very clever if we learn about history. Okay, so again, he says, what was the situation like after the war? And he says, this depends on where you live, whether in the country or in the city. One can say the more urbanized the region was, the worse the supply situation there was at the end of the war. In the cities, hunger became the central experience of the post-war period. And then he's saying, the problem also was the whole infrastructure was destroyed. You know, the Allies, they had They destroyed basically whole Germany with their bombing attacks. That's a different topic. So the whole infrastructure was destroyed. So you had, for example, coal in one place where you could heat with, but there were no potatoes or nothing to eat because it was an absolutely urbanized region. And another place, you had lots of potatoes, but there was no coal. And usually in Germany, before it was destroyed, the coal was brought from place A to place B, and the potatoes were brought from place B to place A. But this exchange was not possible anymore because the transport couldn't be handled anymore. So the one had too much coal, they could have warm rooms, but they couldn't eat anything, and the others had potatoes, but they couldn't heat. Okay, but here the point is, the more urbanized a region was, the worse the supply situation was. Okay, is this telling us something about country living? Is this giving us maybe another point why we should build an ark? Why we should have country living lifestyle? Now let us go back to the end time speech, and I want you to lay down here the structure a bit. In verse 4 to verse 5, Jesus warned us of deceptions. He said there will be false Christs that will deceive many. In verse 6, he's talking about wars. Okay, some wars going on. And he says, but these wars do not mean the end yet. And then he says in verse 7, there will be wars and disasters. So he's picking up that point again. And he says these disasters and these wars mean the beginning of sorrows. Okay, that's what we have seen till now. But Jesus always said, this is not the end. And this is an important point I want to make here. These events that are taking place in politics, in nature, they don't mark the end. That's what Jesus explicitly is telling us. So if we want to figure out when will Jesus return, it's not enough to look at the events that are going on in politics and in nature. Because there have already been 2 world wars, and when First World War broke out, of course people thought that this is now the end. But it was not the end. And when the Second World War broke out, certainly conservative Christians, they believed now this must mark the end. Because Jesus is talking about nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom. But it was not the end. So the events in nature and politics, they don't mark the end. We cannot safely say when the end will come if we only look at nature and politics. There are other developments that are to take place, and these developments will mark the end. Okay, and we will have a look at this now. So we continue in Matthew 24 with verse 9. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Now, it's interesting that Jesus is, in verse 9, there is obviously persecution coming up. But this persecution is, figuratively spoken, just falling down from heaven. Jesus doesn't explain here where does this persecution come from. It's just there. But he will explain later, and we will see this. But here persecution is entering the stage for the believers. Verse 10, and then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. So there is a falling away taking place. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. Okay, here you have this topic, this theme of deception that Jesus laid down at the beginning in his introduction, where he warned of deception, and here he is bringing this up. There will be false prophets, and they will deceive many. And we know that this will happen because that is what we have talked about in the last presentation, Verse 12. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Now, let me stop here. Jesus says lawlessness will abound. It will go above measure, so it will grow incredibly. It will basically rule the whole world. And why is that? Why is lawlessness abounding? Why is it ruling the world? And we have to remember what we read in 2 Thessalonians 2. In 2 Thessalonians 2, we talked about that power that Paul titled the mystery of lawlessness, the man of lawlessness, the lawless one, the Antichrist. Okay, the Antichrist, the great characteristic of the Antichrist is lawlessness. And we know that the Antichrist will rule the world and will draw the whole world into his lawlessness. That's what we saw in the last presentation. And here Jesus says that the lawlessness will abound. So here obviously you have the activity of the Antichrist. Okay? So here's this taking place, that he draws the whole world into his lawlessness. Verse 13. But he who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. So, it's not only that the lawlessness will abound and will spread over the whole world, it's also the gospel. God is not silent in that time. God will speak also, and the gospel will also be preached. So the Antichrist is preaching his gospel of lawlessness, but Christ is also preaching his gospel on this world. Now, if the Antichrist is preaching his gospel of lawlessness, and this is the great deception that's going on, then Christ's gospel must be the gospel of lawfulness. So a gospel according to the law, living according to the law. Now, and we already saw this from Matthew 7 in the last presentation, where Jesus says, "Not all that call me Lord, Lord will enter the kingdom of God, but those who do the will of my Father in heaven." So those that do God's will, they are saved. They will enter the kingdom of God. And then there are these people that are calling him, "Lord, Lord, have we not done this and that?" And they did all these miraculous things. They cast out demons, they prophesied and whatsoever. But Jesus said to them, "You will not enter the kingdom of God because you were workers of," oftentimes it's translated iniquity, but literally there stands lawlessness. You workers of lawlessness. They did not do the will of God. They lived lawlessness. So doing the will of God as the condition for entering the kingdom of God is to live according to God's commandments. So the Antichrist is preaching his gospel of lawlessness, and Christ will preach his gospel of lawfulness. Now, I just want to remind you that the Antichrist we saw in the last presentation is a power from within the ranks of Christianity. Paul titles him the son of perdition, and this term he takes from Jesus' prayer for his disciples. I think it's John 17 verse 12, where Jesus talks about Jude being the son of perdition. And when Paul is taking this term from Jude and is putting him on the Antichrist, he says basically that this Antichrist will be of the same nature, of the same characteristic like Jude was. And how was Jude? Now, Jude was from within the ranks of the disciples. He belonged to Christ, apparently. And he's coming there in that garden and he kisses Jesus. And for all those that were present in the garden except Jesus, it appears like he's greeting him like usually. He's showing his love for Jesus. But in fact, he was betraying him. So and Paul says that the Antichrist will be of the same characteristics. So it appears like the Antichrist loves Jesus. He looks like a Christian. This power looks like a Christian power. It has the name of Christ. And it kisses him. But in fact, it betrays him. Okay, so it's a power from within Christianity. But I don't want to repeat all this. So in the kingdom, Jesus proclaims his gospel, and then the end will come. So here you have these religious developments that are taking place. And these developments, they will mark the end. There are very specific religious events taking place, and they will mark the end. Now, let us complete our, or add this to our structure. We saw in verse 9 that Jesus was talking about persecution that would come up. He didn't explain why and where it came from. He just said there will be persecution, and he will explain later where it came from. It will be a time of tribulation for the believers. There is betrayal, there is a falling away, 11 deception, false prophets, and verse 12 to 14a, you have the lawlessness spreading over the whole world. But the believers, they will persevere. They will stand fast and faithful to the true faith, and the gospel will be proclaimed on the whole world, and then the end will come. So here you have this, in verse 6b, he says, the end has not yet come. And at 14b, he says, now the end has come. So here you see these politics, the political and natural events, they are not marking the end. Okay, but these specific religious events, they mark the end. Now, just to go a step back to these developments in politics and nature, is there an increase in catastrophes? Because many Christians are pointing this out, and they say we have to expect an increase in catastrophes on this world. And I would partially agree on this. I think right before Christ will return, the earth will really sink into chaos. That's what I believe also. But just to have some, here it says that the natural catastrophes, they increased in epoch times. Here you have, I didn't translate the titles, it says natural catastrophes through climate change, they doubled. Okay, then you have cow. Now, okay, this cow died because of climate change. It's, for me, always interesting that today, everything that is negative is somehow linked to climate change. Somehow, I don't know. Yeah. And here you have the amounts of damaging events, and you see an increase. Now, there are other opinions in this as well, statistics that show there is no increase in all this. And I don't want to go into this discussion at all. Like I said, I would understand war, famine, and pestilences to more as a threesome. Okay, like three brothers that are coming along with each other. One follows the other. And the earthquakes as a judgment of God against cities. And we will see this, I think, in, I don't know, topic 8, I think. Now, what about wars and rumors of wars? Because we saw that we are to expect a worldwide war, something like this. Okay, I don't want to be nailed down on this, that it's really a world war. But I would say it will be a widespread war. And is something like this possible in our times? Call to arms. China orders soldiers to get ready for war in 2019 and prepare for military struggle as US tensions grow. Now, this is 2 years ago. And some of these things that I will bring up are 2, 3, 4 years ago. Some of them are very current. But it always is dealing with the same topic. And this is China is growing, United States is growing, and the tensions are growing and growing. So this issue and all these things that I will bring up, they haven't lost nothing of their topicality. Okay. China's mighty military has been told to prepare for war in 2009 as tensions continue to mount over the Red's army expansions across the South China Sea. Expect greater tension in the South China Sea. China won't back down, nor will the US. Okay. That's what Malcolm Davis told. So we are told to expect that these tensions will grow, and they are in fact growing year by year. From 2018, yes, Russia is getting ready for war in case US attacks, diplomat tells UN. Speaking at the UN on Friday, Andrei Belousov, Deputy Director of the Russian Foreign Ministry Department and Non-Proliferation and Arms Control, said that Russia is indeed readying itself for war, so it can defend its people against American aggression. Russia's military builds up in large-scale drills, often painted in the Western media as preparations for all-out war, are a defensive necessity, he said. We are preparing to defend our homeland, our territorial integrity, our principles, our values, our peoples. Russia is preparing for war while the US is preparing war. Now, of course, this is Russia today, so this is a Russian-friendly source. I don't want to have any discussion here who is the bad guy in this whole story. For us, just only interesting is the fact that there is something going on. The tensions are growing. Okay? And there is another new blitzkrieg. US generals spoke about the future war against Russia and China. Friday, 7th October 2016. US generals have said that the future war against Russia and China will be quick and lead to numerous victims. These estimates were made at the annual conference of the Association of the US Army in Washington, D.C., reports The Independent. According to the newspaper, at the event held on the 4th of October, the head of the United States Army Staff, Mark A. Milley, expressed the view that future large-scale war are almost inevitable. That's important. Almost inevitable. And if you're going into this and read, now you will not find, at least here in Germany, anything about these massive tensions in the mainstream media, so-called mainstream media. But in the alternative medias, you will find this by times. And something you will always come across is that there are many people that are quite experts on this. They say it's inevitable that there will be war between China and the United States. Okay. In turn, Major General William Hicks noted that any conflict in the near future with the use of conventional arms will flow very quickly and lead to enormous sacrifices. We cannot stop it at will, he added. We don't have to read any more of this. So, also from the side of the US military, they clearly see that a war is inevitable. And it will be a war that will lead to sacrifices without ends. Of course it will, because the military has developed, the technology has developed. Okay. And how will be a third world war look like? Will there really be armies facing each other and then fighting? I mean, we have missiles and so many things. It will probably will be a war against the civil population. Okay. And I will come back to this later. US must prepare for possible war with China, Admiral warns. Now this is in 2018, February. China, Russia deepen cooperation in what could be Biden's defining challenge as president. Now this is from April 2021. In the deepening ties between China and Russia, President Joe Biden faces a nightmare scenario that could prove to be the most significant and under-recognized test of his leadership yet. The scale and intensity of the latest military moves by China and Russia in Taiwan and Ukraine, respectively, demands immediate attention. Now, what they are talking about, China and Russia, they are getting closer more and more. And this can really be a problem for the United States, because if the United States want to have war, and the United States, I would dare to say, yes, they want to have war, because if China will not back down, because I don't think that the United States will be okay with being the second player or the third player on this planet. They want to be the first player, and they are certainly ready to defend their first playership, and if necessary, by war. And what this is just saying, since China and Russia are getting closer and the United States, they want to defeat China in order to defend their first playership, they will have to have a war, fight a war against China and Russia. And that's also what this this is a Switzerland quote, but it's written in German. The Chinese dragon is dancing with the Russian bear. These two major powers are getting closer, and this has consequences for the security of the West. They say that the rise of China forces the United States to have its focus on East Asia, and therefore there are less resources for the European security left. And then they say that a scarcer scenario for the United States would be a two-front war with China and Russia at the same time. So, and this is basically the problem that the United States is maybe facing. And they are also saying now in this article that that means, because the United States is having its focus on what's going on in the East Asian area, and we will see this in a few slides, Europe has to work for its own security. So it has to develop its own military and something like this. So we have Europe that has to increase its military as well. So everyone is preparing for war. And this is just quite funny. When Biden was not yet elected, with love to Moscow, Biden threatens Putin's tyranny with the end. He promises to end Vladimir Putin's tyranny if elected. Now he is elected and we will see what he will do. Changing on war footing. India reshapes its military, seeks strategic balance with China. Okay, so India, it's not only Russia with China and United States against China, it's also India against China. And here we see that India and US, they are getting closer as well. So there are kind of alliances forming in this whole territory. India sends warship to South China Sea in bold move. Beijing warns conflict now possible. And this is from 2020, and this is also, so this is quite current. So here you see, there's also a conflict with India and China. And the United States is then taking the side of India. And it's also, and then you have India against Pakistan. And so there's lots of conflict going on. And South China Sea, Philippines prepared to build marine fleets to counter Beijing threat. Okay, so Philippines, they want to improve their military as well. Japan could carry the day in the US-China conflict. When Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said last month that the COVID-19 pandemic was the biggest national crisis since World War II, it was widely overlooked that just weeks earlier his government passed by far the nation's biggest defense budget since the end of that conflict. Quote, "It is China, not North Korea, that is the main concern," said the Japanese official who requested anonymity. I don't know how it's pronounced. Now spending will also go towards deploying Japan's first real aircraft carrier since World War II. Some observers believe that the Japanese Navy is now as capable and possibly superior to any force in the Pacific, including China. Oh, this is quite a statement. Okay. Meanwhile, more China-oriented defense spending is on the way. Ministry of Defense forecasts show that the defense budget will increase to $48 billion in fiscal 2021 and rise to $56 billion by 2024. So everyone is getting ready for war. For me, it feels like it is like it was before First World War I. The question has always been who's responsible for World War I, and here in Germany the answer is very simple. It's Germany, of course. Germany is responsible for everything. But if you look at how things develop now, and what people typically do, they just look at the years 1913, 1914, and then they see, oh, it's clear, Germany. But you have to have a look what's going on since many years, and then you will see that Great Britain, France, and many other countries, they were also getting ready for war. And I don't have a slide in here, but the investment in the military was slowly increasing. So there were many countries that were getting ready for war. They all prepared to a certain degree. It just needs something that pulled the trigger. Okay, and then that war broke out. And for me, it feels like we are approaching that point as well. where on so many places tensions are growing beyond measure and so many nations are getting ready for war. And I think what we need is something that is pulling the trigger. And as I said, and as we saw from Matthew 24, we should expect that something like this will happen. Something like a world war will come. Now, if we know something like this, is there maybe preparation to be made? Remember what we saw about Joseph, okay? Joseph understood that this information God was giving him was a call to action. It's not just that he knew what was going on in Egypt in a few years, but it was given by God that he could prepare in an appropriate way. So why should we build an ark? And the first thing that we saw is that it's a way of life according to God's design. Second topic. It's for leaving the sinful environment. And with this topic, we add war, famines, and pestilences. That's what we saw from Jesus' end-time speech. And in brackets, World War III. Now, as I said, the technology has changed. I think, now I'm not an expert on this, but I would expect that such a war would be a war heavily against the civil population. And I think we have a blueprint for this in the Second World War, in what the Allies did in Germany. I mean, they bombed I don't know how many cities. They were just bombing them. There was no military relevance in this. It didn't give them a military advantage. It was just a war against the civil population. The goal was to kill as many people as possible, and to basically break the spirit of war. Okay, and that's why they bombed whole cities till the whole cities were burning, and hundreds of thousands of people were literally melting in this fire. It's a really cruel thing, and I would say a Third World War will also be very heavily against the civil population. So. Yeah, and with all the things that are coming along with it, okay, what about supply? If there is, the supply issue is a severe issue when there is war, because war always means privation. And that's why populations, that's why people like you and me, they don't like war. Although the people that are running our country, they make war, we don't like it, because if it's a very huge war, it always, it's coming along with conditions within the country that we don't like. Now, we saw that in Germany how the supply was not possible because the ways for transport, they were destroyed. Now, today's supply has become so international, it's absolutely incredible. If you go into the supermarket and just have a look at where does all that stuff come from that you are buying, especially in winter times. Okay, at least here in Germany, in winter times, we want to buy a potato, we want to buy tomatoes, we want to buy cucumbers, we want to have apples, pears, we want to have all kinds of fruits and vegetables and all this stuff. But these things are not growing here at that time. And they are also not growing in the country, in our neighboring countries. Where do all these things come from? They are coming from the southern hemisphere. They are coming by plane, they are coming by ship, I don't know how. Okay, and the question really is if these supply lines can be upheld in times of an international war. And I think not to the full, okay? And I mean, if there's war breaking out and I think many countries will then think about, okay, maybe we should keep the food here in our own country and not send it over the whole ocean to Germany, for example. And if this country will not send its food to Germany because it wants to keep that food in his country in this time of crisis, which would be a very reasonable thing, then we won't have that. Okay, and this means that our shelves will be empty, at least that place in the shelf. Okay, so this can cause hunger here in our spheres. But we won't have a problem at this time because we know these things. We have read the Bible, we have studied what Jesus says, we know what he says, and we will live according to what he says, like Joseph did. Okay. And we will draw the right conclusions out of this. Let us go back to our structure. Now I have colored the content of verse 6 to 7 in gray. This is not because these things are unimportant. They are important, otherwise Jesus wouldn't have said them. But these are the events in politics and nature. And as I said, we don't know, these things do not mark the end. And we cannot certainly say because of natural catastrophes or wars that Jesus will come very soon. I refer you back to First and Second World War. Okay? So if we say, okay, natural catastrophes would increase and it goes up like this, some of us will say, oh, we are almost there at the top. Jesus Christ will return in just within a few years. But we don't know. Maybe things are to get even worse and way worse, and we are in reality down there. Okay, so we don't know. And this brings us to the other issue, to the other points that Jesus is addressing, and these are the religious developments. But those gray events, they are important. Okay, Jesus is warning us of them. There will be wars, pestilences, and so on and so forth. But the religious events, they are important. Now, the end-time speech, we are at verse 14 here, but the end-time speech still goes on. And Jesus has a lot more to say. Now, but here in verse 14, Jesus reached the end. And if the end-time speech goes on, that means that Jesus must jump back, go back in time. Okay? It doesn't work other ways. So he's going back now. And since the religious developments are important, and since they are marking the end, we should expect that Jesus will have a closer look now on these religious developments. Now just remember that in verse 9, we saw persecution, I said, falling down from heaven. It was there all of a sudden. Jesus did not explain where does it come from, who's persecuting here. He's just saying there was persecution and it's a time of tribulation. And that's it. And maybe we should expect that he will now give us a more closer look on these developments. What is causing this persecution, this time of tribulation? Verse 15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Now, Jesus is advising here us to read the book of Daniel, okay? I'm also saying this because there are some Christians, and I already addressed this in the last topic, that are, preaching the gospel and preaching Bible prophecy like contrasts. One is excluding the other. And I said this with the example of Paul, that for Paul, in proclaiming the Christ, warning of the Antichrist also had its place. Okay, here we basically see the same thing. Jesus says, read the book of Daniel. Read it. And not only read it, but understand it. Understand it. Then let those who are in Judea, so when you see the abomination of desolation, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. Now, I have to make this point here for those that are not familiar with the end-time speech. The end-time speech has a double meaning. It has its fulfillment in the destruction of Jerusalem back then. That's the literal fulfillment. but it also has a fulfillment on a higher level. And because, let me say it that way, the end-time speech has a local scale and it has a global scale. And maybe I have made a topic where I went through the end-time speech in German. I don't have it in English. Maybe I will make it in English. If you go to the end-time speech and you look at the destruction of Jerusalem, you will see that this local fulfillment is fitting, not in every part, okay? Because we saw that such things like the end is come and the end has not yet come, okay? Although Jerusalem is destroyed. But at many points, it fits pretty well. The total fulfillment and the ultimate fulfillment and the real fulfillment of this prophecy is the global scale, is the world scale, okay? And when he says here about Judea, he's in first place then talking about the Christians in Judea back then before the destruction of Jerusalem. But for the end of times, it's the believers, okay? Those that are following Christ. And these were the Christians in Jerusalem, back then in Jerusalem, okay? But it's, at the end of time, it's the Christians living on the global scale on the whole world. Okay, just that you're not confused here. So when it reads about those that are in Judea, we have to have in mind now, he's addressing now in the global scale, the Christians on the whole globe. Okay? But they are to flee to the mountains. Okay? So, like Lot, okay, he should stop city living and have country living, okay, if you remember. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything of his house, and let him who is in the fields not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. Now, let me just, let me just go back one slide because I missed to make that point. As you can see here, in verse 4 and 5, I made deception red, and in verse 11, I made deception red. Now, the statement in verse 4 and 5 is not in the chronological order. Jesus is bringing this up right at the beginning because he wants to make this point, he wants to emphasize that point, that deception is the key issue at the end of time, the major problem. That's why he's mentioning it at the beginning. And he's coming back to this topic of deception in verse 11. And as I said, Jesus continues with his end-time speech, although he was in verse 14 already at the end. So that means he's jumping back now. And what we will see is that he will pick up certain keywords that he has already used, and that way he's marking where he's jumping. Okay, keep that in mind. So in verse 9 we have persecution and tribulation, and now let us see if we will find this keyword word. So verse 20 or 19, let us read. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. So the faithful ones, the Christians, they are to flee because the abomination of desolation is coming. They have to flee. And Jesus says, for the pregnant ones, this won't be a very nice time. Verse 20, and pray that your flight may not be in winter, obviously. Okay, a winter flight is a very bad thing. Or on the Sabbath day. For then there will be great tribulation, and here we have the keyword, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor shall ever be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. So Jesus says the faithful ones, the Christians, they have to flee because the abomination of desolation is set up. And what this abomination of desolation is, we will see, but not in this topic. They have to flee, and this starts a time of tribulation for the believers. And if we go to our structure here, then we see, okay, obviously Jesus is jumping here to verse 9 and 10. And he's more closely explaining here now, where is this persecution coming from? because it just popped up there. Here it was. Persecution is coming. But who, where, when, why? And here Jesus is explaining it more closely. He says it's because of the abomination of desolation. There is persecution coming. And now he's not explaining what the abomination of desolation is, but he's referring us to the book of Daniel. He says, if you want to know what the abomination of desolation is, study the book of Daniel, and we will do that. So, and then Jesus continues. Now, what keyword should we expect that he will use next? Now, the next would be, on the left side, is deception. Okay, then let us see if he is now talking about deception. Let's read on from verse 23. Then, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. So we have false Christs, false prophets, and they will deceive through wonders and great signs, and we have already seen this in the previous topic, to deceive the elect. So here we have the keyword, deception, and we have false prophets and we have false Christs. Okay, you see that Jesus is taking up the previous chronological order, and he's just giving at certain parts a more closely explanation, and is making things more clearly. Okay, let us proceed. Verse 25. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he is in the desert, do not go out. Or look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. Okay, it's talking about the return of Jesus Christ. So he says, if someone is there who tells you that Jesus Christ has returned, do not believe him. If someone has to tell you that Jesus Christ has returned, do not believe him. And why? And he's now saying why. 27. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west. So one lightning goes from the east to the west one time over the whole sky. So also will it be with the coming of the Son of Man. So as a lightning that goes out from the east to the west, you see that lightning, okay? You cannot oversee, you cannot ignore it. You see it. So is the coming of the Son of Man. You will see it. When Jesus Christ returns, you will see it. No one has to tell you. And if someone has to tell you, you can be 100% certain that this is a false Christ. Okay? Jesus Christ's return is visible for every man. Okay, I want to make that point here because we just have it. We will talk about this in the last topic, I think. For wherever is the carcasses is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Now, let us go back to our overview. Jesus said on the left side, lawlessness, gospel proclaimed. He's not picking up this again, but he also talked about the perseverance of the believers. Okay, they will stand fast. And this is what he's thematizing here. The believers won't be deceived. They know what is truth. Okay, they know what is truth. Okay, let us proceed. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now, I want to stop here. Jesus is describing his return here. And he says it will be after the tribulation. So only after the abomination of desolation is set up, I will return. And this is in 100% accordance with what Paul was telling the Thessalonians. He said to them, Jesus Christ will not return unless what? Unless the great falling away has taken place. Unless the man of lawlessness was revealed. The lawless one. The mystery of lawlessness. Okay. Verse 31. And he will send his angels with the great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So here again you see the return of Jesus Christ is not a hidden thing. It's an absolutely visible thing for every single one. And when Jesus Christ returns, it's not a secret thing, because the dead they will arise. Okay, the dead will arise. Then Jesus will gather his elect. Only then. Okay, it's not that he will gather his elect after they die. Jesus Christ will gather his elect when he returns. Okay, then they will receive eternal life. Like Jesus said, when he returns, he will give in English now. It's in John 5:29. I don't know. I don't have a Bible here, unfortunately. Normally I have one, but okay. But the elect, they will meet Jesus Christ and see him when he returns. So now we have the signs of Jesus' return, and they mark the end, obviously. Okay, so we see that what he's now bringing up from verse 15 to 31 is following the chronology that he was first laying down in the first part on the left side. Now, if we just make an illustration out of this, it starts somehow with wars and disasters. And then the abomination of desolations is set up. So, or in other words, the Antichrist is starting his reign, and he is spreading his gospel of lawlessness. But at the same time, Jesus is preparing his gospel of lawfulness, of keeping the commandments of God. Okay? By the way, that is why in Revelation 12:17 and Revelation 14 verse 12, this last group on this earth, the 144,000, they have the specific characteristic that they keep the commandments of God. Okay? Because there the two gospels are proclaimed. One gospel of lawlessness and one gospel of lawfulness. And the faithful ones, they receive the gospel of lawfulness and they keep the commandments of God. Okay, but I don't want to go any more in this. And because of the abomination of desolation, there is persecution for the Christians breaking out. And one part is falling away, and this is the majority, as we saw in the last presentation, but there's also the steadfastness of some. So some will cling to the truth, some will cling to Jesus Christ and to what he has revealed. Now, somewhere where this persecution of Christians is breaking out, there are the false prophets and Christ's rising up. We have deception and all these things going on. And they will do they will do all kinds of signs. And then ultimately we will see signs and sun, moon and stars. And then finally the return of Jesus Christ will take place. If we look at this illustration, and when we read the end-time speech, the great key point in this whole speech is the abomination of desolation. Because the abomination of desolation is the starting point of all the things that are going on then. With persecution, falling away, false prophets, false Christs, the signs and wonders and all these things. So the abomination of desolation is important that we understand what it means. And Jesus is referring us to the book of Daniel. But I just want to have a closer look on what abomination of desolation actually means and where it comes from. Now he's quoting Daniel here, the book of Daniel. And the book of Daniel is written in Hebrew and parts of it in Aramaic. And abomination of desolation is Hebrew for shikutz. And this is mainly meaning an idol. Almost, really the great amount of texts, it's an idol. So abomination here means idol. And this is a different word for what is then used also, for example, when it says that if a man lies with a man, this is an abomination for the Lord. Or if a man eats an unclean animal, this is an abomination for the Lord. Okay, this is a different word for abomination. This word for abomination is specifically used for idols. For example, Deuteronomy 29 verse 17. And you saw their abominations. This is talking about, he's addressing the Jews, and they saw all these heathen people, and you saw their abominations and their idols, which were among them, wood and stone and silver or gold. So here you see abominations linked to idols. 1 Kings 11. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the people of Ammon. So here again, abomination clearly linked to idol worship. For the children of Judah have done evil in my sight, says the Lord. They have set their abomination in the house which is called by my name to pollute it. So here we have the abomination of desolation in the house of God. The abomination, idols in the house of God. By the way, where is the Antichrist to sit at the end of times? What did Paul say? In the temple of God. So the abomination of desolation is set up in the temple of God. Okay? So Daniel, he's quoting from Daniel, and there are 3 passages where the abomination of desolation can be found in the book of Daniel. It's in chapter 9, verse 27, and there it means the Romans that destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. And that we know that this is the local fulfillment of Jesus' end-time speech. But it is also seen in Daniel 11, verse 31, and Daniel 12, verse 11. And there it's speaking about the anti-Christian power. And that is the global scale. And I'm just stating it here. I won't prove it to you. But the abomination of desolation so has something to do with idol worship. That's what we saw. So we have to expect that there is some kind of idol worship set up at the end of time. And we saw what kind of idol worship is set up in the last topic. We had a very short look at it. When we read Revelation 13, there was this image of the beast that was set up. And what did the people do? The men of this world. What did they do? They worshipped it. So it's an image of the beast. It's a copy. It's a figure of the beast. Okay, basically it's an idol. Okay, and because people worship this idol, this image of the beast, which is just an image, they're also worshipping the beast itself. Okay, that's how idol worship is working. You have a figure of Baal, and you're kneeling down before that figure, and you're praying to this figure, and that way you're praying to Baal, who is somewhere up in heaven, or I don't know where. Okay, and here we have the same thing. The image of the beast is set up, and people are worshipping this image. And thereby they are also worshipping the beast, which is the Antichrist. But they don't know that. Okay? And that is the idol worship that is set up at the end of time. So the abomination that is set up at the end of time is the image of the beast. So if we want to understand what the abomination of desolation is, we have to study what the image of the beast is. And I just also want to add here that the gospel that is proclaimed at the end of times is the so-called everlasting gospel of Revelation 14, verses 6 to 12. Okay. And that the lawlessness that is set up by the Antichrist, or that the Antichrist is bringing upon the world. Okay. What did we read in Revelation 13? What is the Antichrist bringing upon the whole world? What should everyone receive? And what is everyone following? It's the mark of the beast. Okay? Just to mention it here, and we will see this in the following topics. Revelation 13. Just that we see all these words, find them. The second beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the first beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. So he's now making this image, like this Baal figure, for the first beast. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Now, this figure, this animal figure, will not stay a figure. It's becoming alive now here. Now, again, this is symbolic language, okay? But it's becoming alive. Now it goes on. This second beast causes all to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. So here you have this image of the beast set up, and people have to worship this image of the beast, this abomination of desolation. Okay? And if they do not do this, they will be killed. And they receive the mark of the beast. Something that is characteristic for the beast. Okay, because it's the mark of the beast. So although the second beast is giving this, is causing this, that everyone is receiving this mark of the beast. Now, whenever the book of Revelation is talking about beast, it means the first beast. So the second beast forces everyone on this earth to receive the mark of the beast, a sign of the first beast. Something that is characteristic for the first beast. And this is basically what Paul said, is that everyone will follow the man of lawlessness, the mystery of lawlessness, the lawless one. The whole world will follow the Antichrist into his lawlessness. But I will show this in detail in the following two, it's more. I think it's up to topic 10. We will deal with these issues. Okay, for the end of this presentation, why should we build an ark? Because it's a way of life according to God's design. God put man in the garden. That's where man should be, in a garden surrounded by nature. We are to leave the sinful environment. What we see has a great impact on us. And we are not to follow this world into destruction. By seeing, we become changed. That's the principle. And third, there's wars, famines, and pestilences to come. And I have it in brackets here, but we saw that we should expect that it is at least a very widespread war, if not a world war. And with all the consequences, they are coming along with it, okay? War, famines follow the war, and pestilences follow the famines. And so in times of crisis, the best place to be is out there in the country. In this Corona time, for me and my wife, we live out there in the country. Now we are not off grid or something like that. We have our neighbors. We do not see them. Now it's like 50 meters in that direction, and I don't know, 100 in that, and the next one is 250 meters. And so there are some neighbors here, but everyone has enough space. Actually, for us, Corona was not a reality. It became a reality when we once a week drove to the supermarket to buy something. So we put on our mask, which for me always felt like an oxygen blocker. But then we came back, and that's it. And for life, for us, was as it has been before. We went to our garden, we worked there. That's it. Okay. So, and because I'm studying, of course, my studies, they were online. But life, you do not realize, and you could talk with your neighbors. You know, it's what like normal life, basically. And they told us the same thing. It's for them, Corona. Oh, I've heard something about it. Okay. So the best place to be is out there in the country. You have that freedom. There is no one around you that is looking at you. Is he wearing his mask? Oh, the mask fell beneath the nose. I have to call the police. Okay, there's no one like that here. Okay, here in the country, you have neighbors. In the city, you may have some neighbors, but you have a lot of enemies. Okay, but in the country, you have neighbors. And one is helping another, so it's a good place to be. And it's the place where we should be. Okay, it's the life according to God's design. But also in terms of food supply. Now, I don't want to make this thing longer as it is. I think that point is clear. These things will come upon this place, on this earth. Jesus says these things must come to pass. They must come to pass, and they will come to pass. It's only a matter of time. And it is good if we are prepared. And even if it will not come, we didn't lose anything. But if we are not prepared and these things come, this is bad. So make sure that you are following the example of Joseph. He received the revelation of God and he knew this is a call from God to prepare. And I believe we should follow and do the same. But always include Jesus Christ in this. Make him the center of all your actions. Let everything that you do be accompanied by sincere and earnest prayer. God bless you.